Hey, welcome back everybody to Code Talk Teach, Oasis Digital's mostly bi-weekly kind of tech talk show. I guess our big topic for the week is going to be a future module-less or automatic module-based Angular. But as usual, we kind of start with smaller topics before we jump into the big one. Chris, you want to talk about the tool we're all excited about?
Well, I guess Jetbrains announced a new lightweight IDE yesterday, I guess. Yeah, Fleet. So I
Yeah.
signed up for the preview, but I haven't gotten it yet. So
Is there any cost to preview it? Like, do you have to be an existing customer?
I think I had to log into my Jetbrains account. I've of course been a customer for a very long time.
Yeah.
So
Well, I too am a JetBrains customer, but
I believe I logged in and had to click a button to add myself to the list. So I don't know.
but it's not clear if you have to
Yeah, I
if you
got
have
an
to
email
actually be a.
saying I was on the waiting list. I don't know exactly what that means. But.
Well, I guess I should do that too. So, in the ancient times, before any of the non-Java tools existed, I would kind of switch back and forth as I kind of worked on different projects at different companies between Eclipse and I guess it was called. This is before the word JetBrains existed. It was called IntelliJ IDEA then. I think they used to be called IntelliJ or something. Anyway, they've like done some revamp at some point. But it was a great tool then. Of course, so was Eclipse. And it appears to have gotten better. And I've actually been using it more recently for different ecosystem work. Like, I'm doing some C++ from time to time
Yeah.
and use their C product.
There was a time when I would just switch between Eclipse and IDEA like every 6 months because they both have different pros and cons, and I get annoyed with one and I'd switch to the other one, and then I get annoyed with that and switch back. But.
Yeah.
I used PyCharm.
Yeah, look at that. See? Another like it was like the cool thing is they had like the same product and they as much as possible made comparable features, but they're really not as comparable. I mean there are pretty big differences like between the level of tooling that is possible for like Java versus Python versus C. Right. So it's not a direct comparison, but still really impressive tool set, really impressive company. And I have not signed up for the early access, but I did read the blog post, and it's a really impressive architecture. I feel like they're like trying to like learn. Here, Dr. Java. No, Amber is commenting in our comments here, asking if anyone here has used Dr. Java. I think I heard of that a long time ago, but I don't think I ever used it.
I'm going to need to see a link to that.
I mean, a link to Dr. Java, but be aware that links do not come through the chat. So, but I know who that commenter is, and they can send a back channel comment to us.
It sounds like a coffee product to me.
There you go. Anyway, yeah. So it looks like it's going to be I think it is like they learned everything from Visual Studio Code, and then they're trying to go beyond Visual Studio Code. They're talking about like a backend workspace with multiple UIs attached remotely to it. So it should be highly amenable to like distributed architecture, which can be real helpful when you're working on really big things. It's supposed to be highly multi-language. So in theory, it should be more like Visual Studio Code, where you have one IDE and you plug in support for all the languages you're using, versus here's like 5 different monoliths for the 5 different major language families supported. So I don't know. I'm really looking forward to giving it a try when it becomes real, and maybe 2 years from now we're all talking about how we used to use Visual Studio Code and the entire ecosystem moved to Fleet, or maybe not.
I kind of got the impression, I don't see it now in the blog post, I got the impression that they were going to be trying to sell you backend VMs as well, like as a service, but maybe.
Yeah, I wonder how they're going to monetize it, right? Because like the sort of traditional approach of charging money to everyone, I feel like they're not going to be able to take market share from Visual Studio Code if it's not
JetBrains Space, that's what it's called.
Did we lose Kyle?
It seems that way.
Oh no.
a glitch occurred. Am I back?
I can't see. You're not.
There you are.
Okay. Yeah, I noticed something like kind of hanging off my desk, and I reached to rescue it. And apparently, in the process of rescuing it, I unrescued it for a moment. Anyway.
Okay. Yeah, I was just saying that it looks like JetBrains has something called Space, which is their cloud. It's like development environment, CI/CD, etc., and Fleet can attach to that. So I guess you have to buy Space somehow.
Yeah, so I don't know.
You've been putting together such a thing in Visual Studio Code for a while, though, haven't you? Like an idea of like having a development execution environment in the cloud that you connect your editor to.
Yeah, that's a feature of Visual Studio Code. It's been, I mean, I think the architecture has been there since the very beginning of Visual Studio Code, and it's been like, a few clicks away from using it for at least a couple of years now, maybe more. And basically, you run the back end of Visual Studio Code, which is just an executable in there. You run that on a different computer than the one you're using as you work. And so, for certain kinds of work I do, I need a ridiculously overspec'd machine. And so I go briefly fire up like a 128 core machine with a staggering amounts of gigabytes of RAM on AWS, and then run the server half of my IDE there. And then the client half of the IDE just connects to it over a socket and gives you the full local experience. It's pretty cool because if you bring up a terminal, you're bringing up the terminal on the other end, and like the local file system is on the other end of that connection. And so it's pretty slick. You can have kind of an arbitrarily weak computer locally and still have a very good experience because all the work is on the other end. Yeah. And so this new thing is going to be like that pervasively. So Paul, did you have a chat subject of the week you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I was wondering what people thought about the metaverse. That's a fun new buzzword.
One thing I saw is like we're already in the metaverse. That's just like didn't you notice that everything is online now? Like it's already there.
I don't get.
Yeah, I'm having a real hard time. Like, despite being like a huge fan of like the crypto space and the technology behind it, the idea of the metaverse and like the Ready Player One future, it's just, I don't know. I'm not buying it.
I mean, it's unclear what all people mean when they say metaverse. Yeah. But one of the things seems to be like we're interacting in a VR/AR environment pervasively. That seems to be the most common idea I see floating around with that word on it.
So what does Zuckerberg mean when he says metaverse?
I don't know.
So if you watch his thing, like he's like full on AR VR. Like it is about like digital experiences and digital connectedness through hardware being sold by Meta and connecting to cloud services created by Meta to provide those experiences.
So he is trying to create Ready Player One. Is that the short version?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And crypto came into the picture because the idea is that it is a fully digital currency that is like already ready to go for this space.
Yeah, it's not clear to me because it seems like there's like different streams of stuff that flow across my Twitter, and I don't understand how they fit together. It's not clear to me how the crypto dudes connect to the metaverse dudes and like what they have to do with each other. And I say that intentionally because both of those groups are entirely male on my Twitter anyway.
Decentraland?
I tried that once for a few minutes. It was really cool.
Yeah, Decentraland is like an idea of, it is an implementation of a metaverse. It is a digital space that has its own cryptocurrency-based currency that you use within that space.
I just clicked the thing that you can click around for free and like move around in this virtual universe thing. They look very similar to a thing called Second Life that I messed with. It was popular 10 years ago or more. Second Life was super popular then, and I probably spent a total of 1 hour messing with it, but it was very impressive technologically. And I don't know how the metaverse is different than what Second Life was. I do know. I know a little bit about VR though. So, secret, not secret, I have this like inner ear issue in one of my ears that caused me to do a bunch of research about like balance stuff. And did you know that a long time ago, back when the technology to do anything remotely VR would have been, research level expensive, that research was done, careful research was done, and found that if the inner ear and the eyes don't agree on your motion in the world, for a substantial portion of people, that will never work.
I threw up playing Mario 64, so I'm out.
So you're probably out.
Yeah. I can play the side-scrolling game.
So AR could work because the idea is that in AR you never try to create a difference between your perceived position and motion in the world and your eyes versus the video, because like they have to overlay perfectly. But I know that VR gaming is pretty popular. I have a family member who has a pretty nice VR gaming setup, a dedicated space and the little sensor things around and so on. So I'm really impressed with VR technologically, but I am skeptical that anything VR-ish, like sitting around with big goggles on your face, could ever become like mainstream popular.
Yeah. But I could see, like you said, AR with like, special glasses or something like that.
I mean, it's hard to imagine. Like, it just seems like very uncool to have a giant thing on your face.
Yeah.
And I only have a giant thing on the sides of my face because it's the most reliable way to have like an echo-free talk-listen experience for stuff like this. But like, I don't think I'd want to. Well, I don't know. Maybe we should go all in on this, Paul. What would we have to buy to like do this show in the metaverse instead?
A whole bunch of Oculus Quests for us and our guests.
Well, the guests might just have to like watch the non, they might have to mostly watch just the flattened version. Here we go. Here we have a commenter. It's really hard to deal with the screen close to your eyes. It takes like fancy optics, and it still never feels right. Sort of like looking through binoculars never really feels right. I don't know, but on the other hand, like I think that at least my Twitter feed, which I look at every day for like at least 20 minutes of just like what's going on in the world, and every day there is such pervasive negativity about everything that I've started to take an intentionally opposite optimistic perspective. Hey, there's a bunch of stuff going on. Not some of it's not going to work out, but some of it is going to work out. So I am very open-minded. I think that, there may be some metaverse ideas that don't work out, but there may be some really cool stuff in there that does work out. And I want to find a way to be part of it as it becomes possible to do so. So I don't know. Chris, it sounds like you're a no with the goggles.
No.
Paul, we'll have to do some research on what it would take to do our show in the metaverse once. See what happens.
Maybe I'll join you digitally someday.
Okay, well, I guess
I'm down on metaverse. Yes, on crypto.
Okay. Cool. Okay. So the big topic in Angular land. So for those that are tuning in for the first time, looks like our number is a little higher than usual. It's been the last couple. Although we work on many technologies at Oasis Digital, the one that we're most well known for, at least over the last 3 or 4 years, is Angular. And so we tend to hit Angular topics more often than other tech topics, even though, for example, I have personally spent most of the last few months working with Bazel things, not with Angular things. But nonetheless, as a group, we're mostly Angular. So our big topic this week, Angular, is there is this future coming with Angular where the NgModule, at least the manual management of the NgModule, might go away. And Paul, I think you are by far the deepest into this, so do you want to take it away on this?
Sure. So the key thing is I'll put this link out here. Let's see. Drop this in. I can post links in from here, right?
Yeah.
I'll have to find out.
Yep, and I then either any of us can click a button to make
Yeah.
it come up there. The
So-
infamous issue 43784. Yes.
Yeah, so this is a request for comment on the idea of, hey, how do you folks feel about removing the NG module, or at least the requirement of NG module for components? Basic idea is that the kind of mental analogy that they use is the idea that these components that can act as standalone components would have kind of like a virtual module that wraps around them. There's actually a pattern out there called the SCAM pattern, single component as a module, where every component you make, you put a module right there in the same file to export it. That idea is kind of brought to this implementation that they're proposing, where your component would have everything it needs to set up and operate. It has all of the references to other components that you're going to use, and it can plug into the existing DI tree at the point in which it's dropped into the component hierarchy.
So you're saying there's still a module, but it's like implicitly created for you, or there's not a module?
So that's the mental model, but
Okay.
they explicitly state that the backing implementation would not actually have a module. But
Okay.
in terms of getting your head around what's going on, you can think of it as like there being a virtual module.
Okay. So from your point of view, it acts like there's really a module there, but like they don't like waste the bits at runtime with there being a module there. They just like recoded it, or they are recoding it so that they just don't need a module in many situations.
Yeah, it's
Right.
interesting at the RFC. They're like, if you're used to working with modules, read this part. If not, don't worry about it, because they're like, if the virtual module idea is going to work for you, because that's what you're used to.
So the SCAM, the single component Angular module, I've actually been doing that on some stuff I maintain for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
Where I actually have a bash script that runs I give it one parameter and it runs multiple schematics and then deletes the things I want deleted and so on to leave me with a single file that has the component and a module for that component. And so
And somebody has a schematic out there that does that, right? Or,
yeah, I had hacked mine up before. Like before a scam was a thing, I had hacked this up, and so I haven't gone back and like done it the official way yet. But yeah, there is one out there that does it for you.
Basil or something, I don't remember.
So my experience with that is that I like it a lot. Not having
Yeah.
these things stand alone more.
Drop another link into chat. So this is kind of the article. This is Lars Nilsson is kind of being attributed by the Angular team as well as kind of being the originator
expert
of the term.
Oh, great!
Or of the acronym SCAM.
It's a great acronym.
Yeah, you can kind of see in
Great.
detail what he's proposing here for that particular approach, and really it was designed out of the need to help with tree shaking. So extremely large large apps that really need more fine-grained tree shakeable dependencies, particularly those that are most likely going to be in some sort of like e-commerce platform where your user base consists of folks that have an option of going somewhere else if your app isn't loading fast enough.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting. Is not our typical client. Our typical client is dealing with larger internal apps where they kind of have a captive audience. So depending upon your particular market, it may not be a particular issue for you.
One of the oddities is that so much of the interest is around optimizing first load, whereas from what we see, and this may be somewhat idiosyncratic to us, but we see Angular in vast use on vast internal enterprise systems where like the size of the initial payload, I mean, they don't not care, but it's just pretty far down the priority list.
Right.
So Paul, this module-less idea from number 43784, like, can we talk through like there's like the runtime characteristic, and then there's like the code maintenance side, that's like the human side, And then like, is the tooling any better or worse that way? Kind of.
Yeah, so in terms of tooling, the idea is that they would need to, it's still an RFC. Like they don't have anything actually concrete, but the idea would be that they would enhance the Angular language service in order to have it understand this relationship as well. Everything at the end of the day is still statically analyzable. If you look at the imports, there are still strict imports from a module down to your standalone component, or from one standalone component down to another standalone component. You're able to make all of that, and it's all deterministic at dev time. You can follow that tree. And so in theory, just some tweaks to the Angular language service allows it to understand dependencies across components just the same as it does against modules today.
So assuming that they do this, by the time it's all done, it should still be very seamless.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Especially when you look at what they're choosing not to do within the comments of the RFC, they very specifically have considered and rejected ideas that involve doing something like allowing kind of implicit defaults of dependencies on things like common module, for example.
Yeah.
Or allowing global defaults that you set inside your Angular JSON. They don't like the arm's length kind of spooky magic at a distance kind of idea of how all of this actually ties together, binds together, and works.
So I have some stuff I want to talk about around like competitiveness with other frameworks, but I feel like the bigger driver here is just like making tree shaking produce better results. And I think Chris has actually helped our customers repeatedly like untangle Angular module messes.
Yeah.
So like how does this help with that?
I mean, well, it just prevents people from creating huge monolithic modules because they tend to do that. The easiest thing to do is just especially that whole shared module concept that came out in the early days.
Yeah, I've done it.
Everything is now in a shared module, and you have to load that for no matter what you're doing. And so they just have these giant modules. And then, I mean, not only does it affect the tree shaking, but also you've got a whole bunch of imports and declarations listed, and it's a forensic experiment to figure out what is actually using what, and if you have things that aren't even being used at all, so it's just a mess. You can't really tell what's happening. So it's nice. The standalone idea is nice because it's explicit in each component exactly what things that particular component is using, and so you don't have to go back later and try to figure it out.
But I can't have accidental circular dependencies between modules if I just put my whole program into one.
It just works.
Okay, so somebody has, say, maybe who among us has not made a shared module that had like a bucket of everything that shouldn't be, right? So let's say a team has a shared module and it's accumulated 50 components now, with like some dependencies among them and some that are just dumped in there for no good reason. What like, given that we don't yet have the module-less thing, like what is the right way to use Angular modules now? Right? So let's say if you arrive with the big shared module, like what should you do now to start getting ready, to start like getting your module torn apart into small pieces to be ready for when maybe they just all dissolve away?
I mean, we already try to push people towards the NX model of having little bitty libraries, and so to do that, the first step is to split stuff up into little modules because you can't do one without the other. So just trying to push people to be as fine-grained as possible with everything. So I mean, I always tell people to err on the side of being fine-grained and just break everything up. But so it's really kind of that same exercise there.
Yeah, I'd go a step further. One of the things I tell folks in my A4A classes is it is all about the dependency management tree. Like you look at your hierarchy of dependencies, you manage that, you keep that looking good, you keep that in a healthy shape, and everything in your code base gets better.
Right.
And that is only more true with this upcoming change if you have a need to migrate to it.
Right. Like, I mean, it's pretty much 100% of the time when you taking the effort to go through and break up something like a large shared module, you're gonna find stuff that's just crazy and that shouldn't be that way. And like, oh, I didn't know that was happening, and find dependencies that are just not right, and then have the opportunity to fix it.
Now, I would say that like an important prerequisite step is evaluating if you have to take any action at all, because it's not something that they are looking to make required, and it's not something that they know everyone wants to jump to the conversation of let's get rid of modules entirely, but they're not even willing to entertain that conversation yet, let alone talk about a deprecation schedule.
The way they proposed it, I mean, it looks really slick. I mean, it looks like nothing really changes the way it behaves, and like they're intending for them to work together super seamlessly, whether you're importing modules into components or components into modules. What they're looking to do seems great.
Well, I mean, they've literally been working on this since before NgModule existed.
I remember when it appeared.
Right, I did too.
I think all three of us were there. We're using it already when it appeared.
Yeah. I mean, I actually liked it when the modules came because it seemed like a pain in each component to, have to, every time I make a component, list out all these dependencies.
See, I liked that. I actually thought it was a good thing.
I do now.
Yeah. I thought that was a good feature of Angular at the time.
Right.
Although, as I understand, there were many other early evaluators who thought that was a terrible feature of Angular.
Yeah.
But I thought that was a good feature.
It was.
Number one complaint or number one concern that I hear voiced in that thread are people citing Angular material dependencies.
Yeah.
Now, if you make one of those components, you've got to indicate that you're using every single Angular material component that you're using has to be listed out in that component.
That doesn't seem. Let me think about that one. Oh, because you're not. But don't they usually? I'm trying to think of how you're using the material. I guess.
So today you
there are a lot
import
of directives you use together that don't necessarily reference each other, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So you could still bring in like each module as an import with this new syntax, or each individual component that you use and directive, etc.
Yeah.
So, but at the very least, it still requires the same level of granularity that we have today, which is every module that has a component that you're using has to be listed in that component's metadata.
So my take on this, from having been there, when this appeared, is that when it appeared, I think the vision was that this module thing would save you from having to specify so many dependencies, because you'd create these like substantial, like, not tiny, but medium-sized chunks of related components, and then have to just make one module for this group of components, one module for this group of components. But I think if we look at what's actually happened on projects where it matters, like Angular Material, I think is a perfect example to look at, is that over time, it's been shattered to where it's pretty close to a single module per component right now. Now, it's not exactly, because some components have like closely supporting components that are always used together that are in the same module, but it's pretty close to one module per component right now. And it's very inconvenient to use, and it definitely will not be any worse. If the module went away, like, you're not going to have to do any more imports than you do now. You're just going to type a different line of import.
Right.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily true, though, because, like, and I'm not as familiar with Material, but, like, the example they gave in the RFC was the form module, because there are a lot of little directives in there. It's like, well, you're using the NgModule directive, but it assumes that there's another control value accessor directive or something out there as well. And it's like you would have to explicitly list each one of those instead of importing the forms module. And it seems like for stuff like that, having a module would always make sense.
The problem with that is that if to the extent that you aggregate, you're creating a hard dependency and you're paying the cost of all the bytes, whether you need them or not.
Right, which is why they do end up having to be really fine grained.
Yeah, so Angular material is like very fine grained. So
Interesting.
yeah, go ahead.
Interestingly enough, like deep in the weeds of that RFC, they actually also go on to provide, like, here are the strategies that we see for library authors looking to publish in this world in terms of how to do exactly this. Like, do you continue to publish a module that aggregates together common components? Do you publish one monolithic module, or do you publish individual components? And it kind of compares and contrasts these trade-offs in the RFC as well.
Yeah,
That's great.
it's nice that
great thought.
it's nice that there's a strategy where you can provide both at the same time, having standalone components and then an aggregating module so that the user of it can choose how they want to use it.
Well, yeah.
Go ahead.
A key idea here, though, is that, like, this isn't the death of NgModule, and it's not even intended to be. So it's a lot of people keep framing their questions and their thoughts around the idea of the removal of modules, and that's not what this is. This is just an easier syntax for authoring components.
Yeah, I feel like
So I have a somewhat saucy take on that, Paul.
Okay.
And this maybe should be a future episode, so like and subscribe. But I wonder to what extent decisions like that, like, hey, we're not removing that. We're just creating, like, is Angular leadership excessively permanently traumatized by the 1 to 2 transition, and just how, I would say, awfully the community responded to the 1 to 2 transition, that even the thought of there ever being like a keynote with a tombstone with NgModule on it is just like, ooh. And I wonder if at some point that starts to become maladaptive, right? Because kind of my hobby horse on all this is that Angular actually exists in 2 different environments. One is giant Angular projects like the one we work on every day. Or ones, the many. Many customers, many projects that are just big, heavy Angular things. They're going to be Angular, like they're going to be COBOL. They're going to be the cockroach. They're going to be still going in Angular forever. The Angular works great, incredibly well suited for the use cases at these organizations that we assist. But also, there are people making adoption decisions every day, every single day. And that adoption is just an intensely competitive environment. And so things that we are paying dearly for in Angular, other people are getting for free. So for example, there is a rule, I don't know where the rule came from, but like the kind of hesitation about implicit importing. We're going to have to like nail down those imports, and like it's going to be inconvenient, and like we're going to like it, right? Well, like if I pull out some of the competing tools, you're actually allowed to differentiate. Like you're allowed to say, these components I will import explicitly, but these components I'm putting in a bucket to be available for implicit import, and they're only implicitly imported if I actually use them, which means that they're always tree shaking correctly. They're never imported if I don't use them. And although that approach has trade-offs, right? And I'm sure there's some reasons why the very explicit is the right path for Angular, right? Because I it's been about a month, but I read through that entire thread, and I think they're really on the right track, everything in there. But for somebody doing a fresh adoption, it's very, very tempting to pick one of the alternatives that like just works. That you do implicit imports for your like application level components, but if you're using a library of components, you just add that to your component search path, and then they're just available for use, and the right thing gets imported if you use them, and it doesn't get imported if you don't. So I feel like it's hard to go after both effectively, right? So there's this established user base that really wants the very explicit approach, but then there's this competitive space, and competitively it's really hard to compete with things that do more for you. That, if you're, I would say if you're the point of view of, say, a decision maker with a budget, if I can spend an extra 100,000 this year creating features versus having skilled professionals manually managing dependency lists,
Yeah, but I mean, so there's the upfront cost, and then there's the maintenance cost, right? So you
Yeah.
lower one, but the other one will increase, right?
I'm not convinced at all. I actually think that manually managed dependency lists have both an upfront cost and an ongoing maintenance cost. And automatic dependencies both save money on the initial rollout and then continue to save money with every edit ever. With the only downside being you might accidentally be importing something you didn't think you were, and so you probably need some kind of a lint check that says, "Hey, raise a flag if I import more than I expected."
And in the RFC, a lot of what they're saying was like, well, we want super explicitness, but we can like, make up for that with tooling support and having tooling that tells you, hey, you should probably import common module. Hey, these things in your list, I don't think they're actually being used and stuff like that. I mean, to, automate the dependency list a little bit more in the tooling, but not in the actual framework. Which, I mean, seems to make sense. But,
Yeah, and I think there's I'm kind of team Chris on this conversation as well about the length of a project. The longer I'm on a project, the more new categories of challenges that I get to see in software development. And one of those categories is just, the turnover. At some point, every member of your development team has been replaced with a different member of the development.
Definitely.
And being able to point them to, here is the static analysis of how this thing is structured, and you don't need to go and understand a thing about what's in the code to be able to determine what that structure is. I believe, I don't have any proof of this, but I believe that actually will help these teams that are not necessarily looking to hire a team of top tier Angular experts to do their work, but are just hiring someone who's got a little bit of Angular experience to kind of move them forward a little bit. Being able to have that person jump in, make effective changes that don't introduce breaks to the system, breaking changes to the system. I think this kind of system for that kind of problem is better suited. And I think that's exactly what you see. I think more of these decisions coming out of Google and the Angular team are probably just simply about their own product space that is written in Angular than it is anything else.
Yeah. Although I actually feel like a lot of the notion of boilerplate is fine, just tool it up. I actually think that that's more of a reflection of an organization where Java is one of the dominant languages, because that's like that idea has been popular in Java long before Angular was a thing.
yeah. I have a follow on to that. So
Yeah.
I've been a Java developer and done lots of Spring and Hibernate, which is boilerplate too.
Yep.
And then being forced to do Grails for a few months, where Grails is basically a layer of magic on top of the Spring and Hibernate. And it's all like, you don't have to write any configuration, just convention, it just magically does everything. And that's great for like the first 10 minutes. And then when it doesn't do exactly what you want it to do, you're like, where the hell do I figure out how to like change configuration?
Yeah.
It's just a pain in the butt. I'm like, I know Spring, I know Hibernate. If I had the XML file right in front, I could fix this in like 2 seconds. But now I'm like trying to like read Grails documentation to figure out where the magic is happening, how to overwrite it,
So Hibernate is the worst way to do things, except for all the others.
Right.
I had been a long time ago all the way around the block with Hibernate, and in the process, I became convinced that every project that says, "Oh, Hibernate is too complex, I got to go do this simpler thing instead," is simply because they don't understand the problem. And so they're not really solving the problem. And Hibernate is all about actually solving the problem, even though it's a gigantic mess of a problem of getting data in and out of a database in a reasonably correct way. yeah, I think that, yeah, like the Grail's notion of kind of paper over it with a thin layer of that. I don't think that's really the right way. But I think that's a little bit different access, because you can totally imagine something that has the same features as Hibernate, but implemented in a language that didn't have as much like language level boilerplate overhead.
So there are a couple of things that I'm interested in with this new component syntax,
Yeah.
and that is the lazy loadable syntax, like lazy loading straight to a component.
Yeah.
That looked nice. Yeah.
Can you show or point to the exact example of that?
I could do a screen share if that would help.
So yeah, Paul, I think you told me that you thoroughly reviewed the RFC like yesterday, but it was like a month ago that I read through the entire thing, and so
I did it 40 minutes ago.
here, I'm going to add your share up to the stream
right.
here. Can you maybe get us a bigger font?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so here you can simply have a view container ref,
That one.
and on init you say import this component and load it into that, and like no additional modules are needed.
Yeah.
And
So if you could get the list of imports to exist statically somewhere, could you dynamically choose what to import? Like, it has to exist statically somewhere so the bundler can bundle all the right things. But assuming that it's been bundled, you could then like dynamically choose what to import?
Assuming it has been bundled, yes.
Great.
Can you give me, so I've never really had cause to try that. So like, can you give me a good use case for dynamically loading a component, like instead of a route?
A plugin system.
Mm.
Like one Paul made.
I gave a whole talk on this, and the conclusion of the talk was that someday Ivy's going to save us all. And, you know, Ivy's been here for a while now, and I'm still waiting for it to save us all. And I think this might get us that much closer to truly having like a dynamic component system that allows us to like on the fly go pull some code from the middle of nowhere, compile and shove it into a running application. But the idea would be, you know, maybe I have some sort of internal CDN of components that have been compiled from third-party vendors, and my app should never have to change just because one of these third-party vendors has updated their plugin.
So is this
I don't know about them. It's the user who chooses which plugins to use.
Is this a way of basically doing MFE as well?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like a lot of the cases that we use when we talk about micro front end are kind of the easy gimme cases, when there's like, oh, there's a nav down the left, and there's 8 main features of the app, and I'm actually loading in a different application for each. And I'm like, didn't we do that like 20 years ago with like an iframe, and like one of them was a PHP app and one was an ASP app, and we didn't call it micro front end then? That's because that's easy mode, right? Micro front ends where you're just going like route to route are the easy end of the pool for micro front ends. The deep end is multiple components on screen interacting with each other that are independently developed, possibly independently deployed, possibly in different languages.
You see, you're showing the router module code now.
So that previous example, you can do something very, very close to what I showed in that previous example today.
With the router outlet, right?
Well, no, the previous one was, I'm saying how you can bring in a component that will bring in more components.
But you could do it today with a router outlet, right? That's what they're showing here?
No, this is showing how you will in theory be able to do this with the new syntax. This is showing the future state, right?
Yeah, so easy loading without modules.
Right.
Yeah.
So like right now, you'd put a router outlet and it would load a module that would load a component. And with this new one, you could just have a router outlet that just loaded a different component without any module.
Well, when I saw this code, a question that came to mind based on a previous example they had. So like somewhere else in this document, they show like, hey, you don't even have to have an app module. Like you can literally just bootstrap a component. And then, but when I was thinking about that, I was like, well, and then I saw the router module code, and I'm like, where would you put that router module configuration if you were trying to just bootstrap an actual component? You know, like where does that go? Because now would be in app module, you import router module, right? So like, where do you do that?
Well, remember, this is not the removal of NgModules.
Right,
but
but
the addition of a.
Yeah, but they're trying to say, like with this example, they're trying to say it should be possible for a new person to defer learning anything about modules and write a simple app without any modules in it. So I'm wondering, like, does that include routing? And like, would you just in this app component they're showing here, would you put an imports property here and do the router module for root there? Like, I wonder if that would work. I mean, I guess it would, because it sort of implicitly, it makes an injector for apps at the top level there. So, but they didn't explicitly address that in the RFC as like where you would put this router module.
I think the basic idea is that, the bootstrap example, where you don't have any app modules whatsoever, that falls in that category of if you have an app that doesn't have routing, but the second you add routing, you're at a complexity level in which,
you're not going to.
You do in fact still have to know about modules.
It might be true.
I kind of feel like every component library you use is going to end up with like a fork in the documentation, like how to start using this if you have an app module, how to start using it if you don't have an app module.
Well, really, I mean, for the most part, it should be the same. You're like putting the module name either in the imports of your component or the imports of your module.
Yeah, right.
Well, I think that's true in theory. I think Kyle's absolutely right. In practice, what we're going to see is new generations of developers who didn't walk through this fire. And they're going to know of the world being shaped in one of two ways and have no idea how to translate between the two in their head.
I mean, maybe not in their first month of developing on Angular, but by having used it for a while, people have to, right?
I mean, I find that's the problem with, so I'm moving on or whatever, but that's the problem with people is they don't, sorry, I'm going to go off now. Like, they don't bother to dig in and conceptually understand what's happening underneath in the framework and why things are happening. They just know, oh, I typed this here and stuff works. And then, like, that's why they don't progress beyond a certain level, because they don't take the time to understand what is conceptually happening, And so trying to dumb everything down and be like, oh, they can just turn on an app without understanding any of it. It's like, that's not realistic beyond like the first 2 months.
I mean, this is literally the secret to becoming a senior developer, an architect, and so on, is to not just shove some stuff in and move on, but to like dig in until you understand what is happening. And so obviously there are a lot of senior developers and architects in our world, and so a lot of people do that, but many don't. But yeah, it's also like it's the secret to how our training works. How do we get good reviews from our training? Well, we just keep digging into the thing in front of us until people have had their questions answered all the way down to whatever base level they're building on their understanding on, and it works extremely well. Everybody likes it.
So Chris, this came out today. Would you try to make your app be a module-less app as much as possible? Or would you continue doing it kind of however you do it today? Something in between? What do you think this is gonna, how do you think this is gonna change how you write apps?
Honestly, like, from what they're saying it should look like and act like, it seems so simple and straightforward that I would totally just start doing it. I mean, and the way you can mix and match it too. I mean, you don't have to necessarily rewrite your whole app. So yeah, I would totally just pick it up and start doing it that way, I think. Unless I was writing something which isn't very often. Something like form modules where you have like those kind of interacting directives and things like that. But that's rare to write something like that anyway. So for the most part, I think it would be pretty straightforward to just do components instead of dependencies. So yeah, I would totally start trying to write things that way. Because again, I'm already in the camp of trying to do, scam. It's so funny. Scam as much as possible anyway. So yeah.
So Paul, if you were advising somebody on a big project with 40 developers and so on, and this comes out in Angular 14 and it works pretty well, how quickly would you recommend moving to it?
Moving to it,
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't lift a finger to port existing code.
Yeah, I mean, but when you touch existing code, like, oh, I need to rename this component. Should I rename the module too, or should I just make it just throw away the module? Or I need to move this component from here over into this library. Should I bring the module along, or should I just delete that module thing we're not doing anymore anyway? Or I'm making a brand new component. Should I create a module for old time's sake, or should I not?
Yeah, that there's so much contextual stuff about a client and their idiosyncrasies there that is a hard question to answer.
Sure.
Some of the things.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, some of the things that I'm concerned about trying to advise someone to do that is everyone on the team, or at least the majority of the effective members of the team, are they able to handle a code base that has both of these approaches at once? All right, there are some people who are just totally thrown off when you have more than one way to do a thing, and they just kind of panic and they pick whatever one they currently feel like that day, and they move forward with it. If I have a code base that has to live in both of these worlds, and I have developers that have that kind of reaction, then I'm probably going to advise not to move forward on an existing project at all with it. Continue to do things as you do it today for that consistency over this little bit of less boilerplate.
So what should the criteria be? So once we have this feature, I don't know if Angular 14 is the answer. Once we have this feature, what would the criteria be then to advise large established projects to start discarding your modules, opportunistically? I'm not saying stop the world and demodulize, although I would personally do that on day one, but that's just who I am.
Well, it has two primary benefits. One is that it has reduced boilerplate, and it has, in theory, better load time characteristics. So unless one of those two things are a measurable problem for you, don't spend any resources in converting. If you got a new project, you may as well use the new syntax and get those characteristics for free.
So you're just sort of saying it's relatively minor in the world of already developing good, big, complex Angular things, and so
if you've already figured out how to solve the core problem of whatever your app's trying to solve, re-architecting it for the sake of using this new thing that doesn't capture one of those two benefits of reduced boilerplate.
Is it really a re-architect though? Because I kind of feel like this thing might ship with a schematic that says, go find all my modules that aren't doing anything and just chuck them, and then only keep the modules that actually had some non-trivial code in them. So
there are situations that might require an architectural rethink, especially when you have modules that are utilizing the for root for feature pattern. Because the
totally.
intersection of this system and how DI works is interesting. And so if you're doing a lot of library-centric development and your libraries produce modules that require they be configured, you still need those modules in place. So you'll have to carefully tease apart what components don't rely on these configured services in these modules versus which ones do, and then you can only separate and tease out the ones that don't have a dependency on those configured services.
This points out something that you and I do differently, Paul.
Oh no,
Well,
fight!
no, it's not a big deal, but like you tend, like if you have to configure, you have a service that needs to be configured, you tend to add like a for root or for feature method to the module to do that. And whereas I tend to just use injection tokens, which I think would be a little easier to convert, because then if you at least have like an app module, then you can just list the injection tokens there, and you don't have to actually. I guess it doesn't really matter, but yeah, you can get rid of the other module because you don't need that method just to pass in configuration.
So Brandon is here with us. Wants to talk about.
Oh yeah.
Wants to talk about the init logic. Thank you for being here, Brandon. We will talk about that.
Yeah, it's like app initializers.
I want to rescue back. So Chris, I've done the injection token thing too, but I thought that a lot of times one of the main things that's inside of for root or for feature is just the code that uses the injection token. So doesn't it often end up just being like a shortcut?
No, because if I have a service that needs configuration, I just create an injection token for the configuration, and then the service, it gets injected directly into the service. The user just has to register that injection token with a value in app module. I don't have any for root or for feature methods in my module.
Yeah, the difference is who has to. So either way, there's an injection token. The question is who's responsible for the syntax of management of the injection token. Is it okay for the app author to know that an injection token is in play and provide the services for said injection token? Like, is that the API interaction you want for setup, or do you want a for root for feature kind of setup? And either one's valid. It's just a matter of
it's just a different. I tend to do it differently. That's all I was saying.
Like Firebase has a lot of their APIs. Angular Fire has a whole lot of their APIs that are like you're describing, Chris. Whereas if you need additional configuration, rather than handling it all through for feature for root, here are the providers that you need to know about, that you need to provide this value for this injection token.
Yeah,
So,
the way of doing it with like the for root or for feature. I mean, I can see an advantage of that is it's a lot more explicit to the person trying to use your module. Of hey, this module has this for feature method. It takes in these parameters. I have to call it and give it something. Whereas knowing that, oh, by the way, you have to also register some injection tokens is a little less explicit, a little harder to know about.
Yeah. But organization wide and like end to end, there's less code down the path that you're describing.
So what about this thing that Brennan brought up, that modules are a place to put initialization logic, that even if you're not setting up an injection token, etc., you need to put your initialization somewhere. Is that still going to be the case, that you have to do an explicit module when you need that, or is there going to be a new place that you could put initialization code in a module-less world?
Is he? I'm sorry. Is he talking about like the for root for feature methods there? Or?
I think he's talking about app initializer.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like the app initializer functionality of your app module, being able to say, here is some runtime configuration I want to set up for the app once it starts up. As of right now, I think that's even called out somewhere in the thread on the RFC as well, that hasn't been addressed. And it goes back to, that's because this isn't a getting rid of modules. This is a component syntax nicety. So yeah, that's another area where if you've got a lot of your architecture baked into that app module, it's not just a replace and move on kind of environment.
Yeah, Brendan had the same comment. That's not in the RFC yet.
Yeah, and there's an interesting comment from Lars in the RFC also. He gives his feedback later on where his only complaint with it is the title. And I thought that was a really smart comment that he had there. He's basically calling out the theme I keep going back to is, no, we're not getting rid of modules. We're not getting rid of modules. This is a new syntax that allows you to write components in a slightly more convenient package. And making sure that we don't accidentally conflate the two and try and solve all of these problems before we get the payoff of this new syntax.
Right.
But yeah, so in advising clients, converting, unless you're actually solving one of those two problems, or some other as of yet unthought of problems, I don't see a reason to ask them to move off of what they currently have. Now, who knows? Maybe tomorrow they release the RFC for the module-less version of Angular. Then we'd be having a different conversation.
That's what I kind of wondered, is like, how much actual, like, is this primarily about the developer ergonomics, or is there going to be some sort of actual runtime payoff, right? Like, is it possible that if I expunge all use of modules, maybe at some point I then get a runtime cost reduction? But even then, it's hard. Like, for the subset of the Angular world that we work in every day, the plausible JavaScript bundle size reduction from getting rid of some modules is going to be pretty small, right? Like maybe tens of kilobytes. And I don't think it's going to register relative to the size of it. I mean, we're talking about megabytes of application code is common.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And megabytes of images on just arbitrary pages is common. It's hard to see getting excited about the byte cost savings of any change to the module system. Yeah, Brandon's asking if they get compiled away. They do get mostly compiled away, yes. Modules are much like at runtime. They're mostly just setting up some injection and calling an initializer.
Yeah, they're mostly there to set up the dependency injectors.
Yeah, right. And so that it's likely that the actual runtime code to set up the dependency injector will be almost identical, whether or not you use the module API to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah, because from the RFC, I mean, it sounded like, the injection tree and all that is still going to work exactly the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, I try to throw out useful little tips. Here's a tip that I've used occasionally on Angular apps, but I've hardly ever heard anyone else even mention. So I don't know if that's because I'm the only one that tripped over it, or if it just is useless to everyone but me. But did you know that like every component puts itself in the injector? So from arbitrarily deep in an application, you can trivially inject any of your like runtime parent components. And so one of the ways of sharing and managing state, like if you have some component that acts as a container for a subsystem, and like deep inside it, 10 levels down, you need to connect to some state that's in that wrapper component around the whole thing, you can just inject it and use it. And there are cases where you can chuck a whole bunch of complexity by just putting the state at the level that it semantically should be, and then from deep inside, inject the component at that level and grab what you need. And of course, you can
be careful. You tell too many people that, they'll reinvent AngularJS.
Just don't say $scope, and you can get away with anything if you don't say $scope. Huh. Well, I think we've kind of ran out on this thing unless anybody else has something else. Let me see here. Oh, of course, here we go. Zachary, who works with us. Yeah. Zachary is an iconoclast who bends the tools to his will, so I'm not surprised to find out that he just reaches and just fluently uses component level DI, no problem. Of course he does. Let's see here. Anything? Here we go. Another comment. Yeah, exactly. As long as we don't call it $scope, we're fine. Well, do we have anything else, or are we wrapped up here?
I think we're wrapped up. I'm excited. Even though I don't have a lot to advise clients on migrating, I'm super excited to start using it on new code. I'm ready to dig in and try it out. So ship it.
Yeah, I want to encourage Brandon to like that. I want a new router. I don't dislike the current router, but I am on board for a new router. So let's do that. I guess my overall opinion on this thing is I am very optimistic about the Angular future and excited to see that it looks like there's a loosening of the grip of that hesitancy to like make significant changes from that Angular 1 to 2 trauma, and that this change hopefully will be the first of a series that really radically up Angular's competitiveness in the current landscape. And I think that is an absolute tailwind for all of us working in the Angular space to have motion in that direction. Chris, do you have a closing thought? I don't want to.
No.
And on that note,
On that note, we thank you all for watching, and remember to like and subscribe so you hear about the next one.
thanks, folks.
Bye, everybody.